sorry. I'm trying to figure out the slides. Give me
No
one
problem at all.
second,
Take your
I'll be
time.
ready to go. Okay. Let's see. So I was just trying to practice with Cordy so this wouldn't happen, but it's still a little weird where it's in presenter mode and I don't know how to get it out of there. So let's see if I can, if anyone has any tips, feel free to jump on with them. I want to make sure I'm showing you the right presentation. Okay, let's try this. Cordy, if there's anything else you want to say while I'm figuring this out, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, I can talk. So I'm sure some of you have received kind of the list of events that we've gone through for the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative. I do apologize for the volume of emails that I'm sending. I'm sure it's getting a little bit annoying, but I just want to make sure that these events are on everybody's radar. And I have gotten some feedback that people like to make sure that they reserve their weekends for some of these events. So that's why I did it all at once. All of the registration links in that email are active, so you're welcome to register. Just please email me if you have any questions regarding it. Yeah, I want to thank everybody for, many folks have been sending some information on the number of acres that they've burned in 2019, 2020, and 2021 and 2022. And that's been really helpful just in order to help pass the new legislation to create a prescribed fire claims fund. And so if anybody has more questions on that, that'd be great. But even having these numbers for YBBC is really important moving forward so that we can apply for more grant funding.
Okay, I think I'm ready. I'm
All
gonna
right,
do it
no
as
worries.
a PDF, and hopefully that'll work okay for everyone to see. Thanks everyone for bearing with me. And thanks for the introduction, Cordy. My name is Carrie Levine, and I'm a senior research scientist at Spatial Informatics Group. We're a group that is based out of the Bay Area, but our company is remote, so we have people all over the country and the world working on forest and remote sensing and carbon projects and kind of a full suite of like environmental issues. And so my focus, I have a background in forest ecology and fire ecology, and I have recently transitioned more into kind of the interactions between forests and fire dynamics and the human environment. So I'm going to, originally when Jamie reached out to me to give a presentation, he was interested in my research on quantifying historical forest conditions. And I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to that just to kind of bring us up to date, but I know this group is really familiar with a lot of those issues, so I'm going to kind of go quick through that. But I'm really excited more to talk to you about the work that I'm working on right now about modeling fuels and integrating those into fire models, and then using that to predict fire behavior for near-term and long-term fire. And for this group in particular, I'm really interested in just showing you the tools that we're building, showing you how we hope that people will use them, and kind of just asking you at the end what tools you would like to use, if you think you would use these tools, if not, why not. And this is like really informal. I'm not like gonna, this is more just like me as a Nevada County community member. I just want my work to reach as many people as possible, and I want as many people to use it as possible. So I thought this would be like a fun crew to just kind of hear your thoughts and have a dialogue. So, oops. So I guess I just gave you the presentation outline already. But yeah, we'll talk about impacts of fire suppression in the Sierra Nevada, some research insights. I'll talk about some of the cutting edge field modeling that we're doing, and then some of the tools that we're developing for fire behavior prediction, and then just have a dialogue about what's next and what do stakeholders need, and where we can take the research from there. So the kind of guiding principle of my research over the last decade has been to understand how disturbance leads to heterogeneity and how heterogeneity in forest impacts forest resilience. Sometimes we think of this as being called like the portfolio effect, where, like an investor, a forest will invest in a lot of different strategies for maintaining structure and function so that when it's faced with new novel conditions or difficult conditions, it has a lot of different strategies that it can use to handle those conditions. When I'm thinking about heterogeneity and resilience, what I'm thinking about is heterogeneity in the sense of forest structure. So structure vertically and spatially, forest composition at a range of spatial scales, and forest functions. So things like species, habitat, biodiversity, carbon storage, water cycling, and that kind of thing. So this research direction took me into research into pre-colonial settlement California forests, and thinking about how forests have changed over time and how that change over time has led to a decrease in forest resilience. So often our forest management goals and restoration goals are focused on restoring to pre-Euro-American colonial settlement conditions. I think actually that's shifted in a sense in just really recently in the last couple of years to thinking more about, like, instead of restoring to past conditions that were resilient, thinking about conditions that will be resilient for also like the future climate that and fire regimes that we're expecting. So I think that kind of thought in management is shifting a bit, but until recently, a lot of management has really been focused on restoring to historical conditions. And I've done a lot of research on like how those conditions are measured and how we can corroborate between different measurement types to understand what resilient forests look like in the Sierra Nevada. So I'm just going to run through kind of quickly some of the different types of historical data that I've used and how and where we get those data and what that data looks like. So just to start with, we have historical photographs, and those help us compare between just visually what different sites look like. And I think they're really good heuristics. They, aren't going to be quantitative data, but they're really good qualitative data. And just personally, they're like really fun data to work with. We also have timber inventories from the late 1800s through the early 1900s throughout California. And these have been a really valuable resource in understanding what forest conditions were like. You can imagine kind of the spatial scale of these, where they aren't too large, but they give you a really in-depth view in a smaller area. And those have been really valuable for work throughout the Sierra Nevada. We have vegetation type mapping. So that's data that's been used to quantify shifts in species composition and thinking about how pines versus oaks have shifted over time. And then we have tree ring and fire scar reconstructions. So these use the fire scar dates within tree rings or stumps to develop chronologies for multiple species across space and time. And this is a way that we've been able to really understand the fire regimes of Sierra Nevada forests over time. And then two more. So this is from a paper that I did previously of a long-term study of the same site over about 60 years. So this site was first measured in the 1950s, and then we measured it up through 2013. And that helps us see how species composition and tree size and all of these different measurements have changed over a long period of time. And then the last one that I've employed is a little bit different, but using analog research sites. So this is using forests that have similar structure and composition, but have not experienced the same fire suppression that we've experienced in California due to our firefighting strategies. So this is a site in the Sierra de San Pedro Martir in Baja, and we use this as an analog site to the Sierra Nevada because it has the same species mix. It's also a mixed conifer forest, and it's the same forest type, but it's just have a different fire regime. So that's a good way to look at how fire regimes have impacted the species composition that we see. And so all of these things together, they each have their own inherent limitations, but when we use them in combination, we're able to converge on comparable results. So, oh, sorry, this is a slide. Okay. So based on this information, we can get an idea of what these forests looked like prior to Euro-American settlement. So when I say that, I mean, around the 1800s. Some of these data sets are from slightly later when the forest had been already impacted by some Euro-American settlements. So the mid to late 1800s to early 1900s is when a lot of these data sets are from. And so we can use this to quantify forest conditions prior to fire suppression, to quantify fire regimes prior to fire suppression, to assess how fires shaped the landscape, set some baselines for forest restoration, and then to also measure what's changed, how the forest has changed, and how fire regimes have changed. And so I know that everyone here is really familiar with how fire is shifting on the landscape in California, and just especially how the removal of fire on these landscapes has led to larger and more extreme fires. This is a really cool web tool that Cap Radio developed, where you can look at the size of fires over time, and you can really see the shift into much larger fires over time. We also know that fires are burning at a lot higher severity, and this makes it hard for the forest to recover. So this is a study from this is a study from the sorry, I'm blanking. The Rubicon Canyon fire in 2014. I think everyone knows which one I'm talking about. Thank you. Yes, King Fire. For some reason, my brain always says Ruby Fire. Okay, yeah, King Fire. Thanks, Cordy. So what is really interesting about this fire is that it burned really hot in these central areas. So this is showing the predicted probability that there would be at least one tree seedling in these areas. So the dark brown and the lighter brown, what we're seeing there is that it's predicted that there would be very little seed availability to reforest afterwards. So there's been a lot of restoration work that's happened on this fire, and information like this helps us figure out how to prioritize that restoration work. But this, I just show this to show that we know that the fires that we're seeing now have a greater high severity component, and that has lasting impacts on the ecology after the fire. So that's just kind of a quick roundup, and I present this. I know everyone knows a lot of this information already, but just as a way of kind of demonstrating a lot of the thinking that I had been doing until the last few years was about how fire impacts natural landscapes and how fire impacts wildland vegetation and forests. But I've really been shifting more lately into thinking about how fire impacts the built environment and just our social, like the social ecological impacts of fire, I guess I would say. And so we know that more extreme fires have greater impacts on the human landscape. I didn't want to show, a really dramatic photo of flames approaching communities because I know a lot of people here have experienced that, and it can be pretty traumatizing. And I think a lot of the reason my research has shifted is because I'm just thinking about fire impacts on communities a lot more, living in a fire impacted community. So I'm just, I guess that's to say I'm aware of like that it's an emotional issue and not just a research topic. And I wanted to just recognize that and to let everyone know that I feel the same way about it that you probably do. So in that shift, what I've really been focusing on lately is modeling fuels and fuel pool transitions over time. So that just means modeling how fuels are moving between these different pools. So live tree pools, dead tree pools, snags, and then what we consider surface fuels, which are coarse woody debris, fine fuels, litter, and how we can better quantify that, and then how we can better incorporate those, how we can incorporate better fuel models into our fire models, and build tools for people to use to think about near-term and long-term fire prediction. So some of my research objectives that I've been working on lately include modeling the transitions between pools, especially incorporating the measured values into some of the like Forest Service tools that we use to model fuels over time. So instead of using the parameters that the model provides, using actual data to update the models so that we have basically Sierra Nevada's kind of specific model with our measured data incorporated into that model. I've been working on creating annualized maps of surface and canopy fuels, specifically for the layers that feed directly into fire models. And then I've been modeling fuels, particularly in WUI areas, so that we can try to get better fuel models that better match historical fire spread and help us understand how fire is likely to move through WUI areas. The interesting thing about that is that most of the fire models are wildland fire models, and they're not really meant to be used in the built environment, or they're just they're not parameterized to kind of describe that movement. So we've been updating those fuel pools to try to get better ideas for near-term and long-term fire forecasting in WUI areas. And then lastly, integrating fuel models into near-term and long-term fire forecasts. So I'm going to talk first about this project, Fire Factor. I realized when I was putting this presentation together, I should have taken one of the later dates because the release of our products is happening in April. And so I can show you a lot of the methodology, but I can't show you the results yet. But I would be really excited to share that with you when it's available. This is a project that I'm collaborating with a lot of different organizations. The group that is leading the project is a group called the First Street Foundation, and you might be somewhat familiar with them. They created a tool called Flood Factor that gives you the flood risk for your house and a lot of different metrics of flood risk and a flood risk score. The scoring goes from 1 to 10, and a lot of information about flooding, and all this, the modeling is happening at the parcel scale. So you essentially can put your address in, or any address in the continental US, and get a 1 to 10 score of the risk to your home. So we're basically building the same thing, but for fire. But they recognize that there's a lot of difference between flooding and fire, and wanted to bring in experts in the fire realm. So they partnered with us at Spatial Informatics Group, and Pyrogens, and then Reax Engineering is in Auburn, and Apex, they're based in Canada. They do a lot of vegetation modeling. So we brought a lot of experts together for this project, and the overall goal has been to do a parcel level risk score for every parcel in the US. And so this fire modeling incorporates the fuels, which I'm leading the field team. So I'm going to talk mostly about the fields, but just want to mention that there's also weather and climate forecasting, projections of vegetation growth, and then fire modeling. We're doing this for 2021 and 2051 so that the users will be able to see how fire risk changes over a 30-year period. So this is what the interface will resemble Flood Factor. They're doing a revamp of the website, so it won't look exactly like this, but I just wanted to throw up an example from the website of what Flood Factor looks like. When you enter an address in, it gives you a summary, community risk, explainers, and then personal solutions. So it's really oriented towards helping people identify, what actions they could take that might minimize their risk. And especially for fire, I think there's a lot more that you can do as compared to flooding. So we've been working a lot on that section. So I promised Jamie when he told me that I could talk about this instead of my older research, that I wouldn't get too technical. So I just throwing this up there as a joke. I'm not going to walk through this whole model, but I thought that it would just be kind of nice for people who are interested to see sort of how we're deriving these annualized fuel layers. And so the main idea is that we have to account for disturbances that happen in areas that change the fuels, and then update the fuels for those disturbances, and output these fuel layers that feed into the fire models. So we've been updating the fuel maps, existing fuel maps based on disturbances that are collected from publicly available databases. So that's all fires that have happened within, it's a 10-year period that we use from the date. So example, for 2021 fuels, we're using the 10 years previous, 2011 to 2020 disturbances, to get at how fuels are affected by disturbance. And we're also using any treatments that happen that are available in public databases. So I just bring this up specifically because something I'm interested in talking about with this group is the thing that I think is missing from this is forest health and restoration treatments that happen on non-public lands. And I know a lot of people here are doing that type of work on their own properties. And I really want to find a way to incorporate that into here so that it's reflected in the in the fire factor scores. For example, we are using a lot of remote sensing, so we can tell when like a moderate severity treatment is happening, like if forest thinning has happened or a harvest or that kind of thing. But we can't really from remote sensing tell if a prescribed burn has happened or if something like a hand thinning treatment has happened. And I think our model would be a lot better if we had that data in there. So I'm really curious what people think about how that data could be collected and incorporated. I know that groups like this have a lot of data collected on like acres treated and that kind of thing. For something like this, we really need it like geospatial. And so we're starting to just kind of put together a team that can figure out the easiest way to start mapping that. So that's something I'm really excited about. But for the first pass, it's basically just everything that's happened on any public lands in the US. So this is kind of what that ends up looking like. So this is an example for our canopy cover layer. The black on the far left panel is the disturbances. This is like that little white area that's kind of surrounded by black, that's Santa Rosa. So this is like Sonoma County, Lake County, and Mendocino County, and that's just, that county has experienced a lot of fire over the past 10 years. So the starting conditions that we're using is publicly available data from the Forest Service and USGS. It's a data set called Land Fire, and some of you guys might be familiar with that. So this is the land fire canopy cover. And then this is our 2021 layer. So in the footprint of those disturbances, you can see that the canopy cover is pretty reduced because we've taken that disturbance. For the fires especially, we take the severity and the time since disturbance and use regression equations and crosswalks to, based on a bunch of different variables like the vegetation type and the vegetation conditions like height and cover and things like that, and then use those equations to appropriately reduce the fuels at the pixel scale. So this is happening at 30-meter pixels across the US. So you can kind of see like that it's where there's high severity fire, canopy cover is being reduced, where there's moderate severity fire, so you're still within the footprint, or low severity fire, there's still some canopy cover. So this is an example for canopy cover, and then we're doing this for all the different fuel layers that the fire model needs. So there's 5 different fuel layers. And then this is just, I wanted to mention how we're updating WUI fuels, which I mentioned earlier. We're using machine learning methods that include parameters for topography, vegetation, weather, historic fire behavior, and historic structure loss. And then updating the fuels in these WUI areas. So this is Grass Valley, Nevada City, and the surrounding areas. And we developed a new WUI model that's more up to date and uses building footprints from 2018 to delineate the WUI interface and intermix zones. The influence zone is really more of like wildland vegetation area. Obviously, there's homes in those areas, but those areas, the fire models still work pretty well. So where it's where it's orange and red is where we're focusing on updating the fuel models to better reflect the conditions and how fire moves in those areas. So this is kind of what this project ends up looking like. We have the disturbance in the WUI. We have a current fuel profile. We use an ecosystem process model to project vegetation over 30 years to get the future fuel profile. We use current weather and future weather conditions, feed this into the fire behavior models, which we run the fire behavior models about 10 million times with like different ignitions everywhere, and just look at how fire spreads and at fire behavior. So burn probability, flame length, ember sum, lots of different variables. And then what's cool about the fire factor project is because it's at the parcel scale, we have characteristics per parcel. So things like building materials, time, year built, all of these things specific to each building. And then those get fed into the ensemble hazards. And so we have that for 2021 and 2051. A thing people ask a lot is does this get sold to insurance companies? And the answer is no, it's just a publicly available website. Everyone has access to it. And a lot of the data is open. All of the data that goes into the score, you are able to see. So it's really transparent. It's really different from, what insurance companies are using, because they have their own proprietary models. This is meant to be empowering for people, and also like kind of to be able to look at solutions for yourself, and then maybe even bring that to your insurance companies to show. So yeah, the goal is not to enrich insurance companies. The goal is to empower people and be as open source as we can. And so this is another project that I'm working on that I hope some people are familiar with. If not, that's okay, but I can introduce it to you today. So this is a consortium that SIG is leading. It's funded by the California Energy Commission. So it's state funded. So all of the data in this is open source and freely available for everyone to use. And similarly to First Street, we're incorporating weather, fuels, and then specifically focusing on near-term fire forecasts and long-term fire forecasts, and creating tools for people to use to be able to look at these near-term and long-term fire forecasts online, and especially for the near term, like when the fires are occurring. So this is just a screenshot. I wanted to do a demonstration, but I guess, happily we are not in fire season right now. So there aren't any active fires in California that I could use to show you the website, but we did a really extensive webinar that's available on the Pyrogen site. I guess I can share the link with Courtney. She can share afterwards, or I can post it after when I'm done talking. But the webinar explains how to use this site. But I can kind of just talk through it from the screenshot. So up at this top bar, you'll see fuels, weather, risk, and active fires. And if you click on any of these menus, you can start to explore for fuels. You can look at different fuel layers and what the fuels look like for your area in California. For weather, you can look at current weather and the weather projections, and then it has a lot of fire weather metrics that you can look at. So in the summer, I find it really helpful if I'm curious, about wind speed or wind direction, or just fire weather in general. Risk is updated. I think it's almost like per minute because the weather data is really fine-grained, and the risk includes just based on the kind of integrates the fuels and the weather, and has different things like structures impacted and like the probability of like a fire spreading should it be ignited and things like that. So you can look at that if you're interested. And then what I think is like the most powerful tool is the active fire tool. So you can click, so you'll see this panel on the left, this screenshot, it's the bar is pulled down, but at the top you can click on, you can pick a specific active fire, or you can have all active fires, and then you can select which fuel model you want to use, which fire model you want to use, and the forecast start time. And then you press the play button down on the bar at the bottom, and it shows you based on our fire models what the projected movement is. It also has this cool option where you can basically tell it, like, do you want to use like worst case scenario conditions? Do you want to use like median scenario conditions and this is based on like historical weather, or do you want to use like better conditions, like if it had magically just rained, I don't know, in August right before the fire or something like that. But just anecdotally, during the river fire earlier this year, my home was really close to it, and I, even though I'm a scientist and I study this all the time, I panic just like everyone does when that happens. And then I remembered that I made a tool to help in situations like this. And I looked at the worst case scenario projections for the fire, and it really helped me understand, like, okay, this is like based on the topography and the winds and the weather, like this is how the fire wants to move. This is what we can expect. And just for my own peace of mind, it was like really a great tool to have. And I hope that that a lot of people can use it in this upcoming fire season, just to better understand like what the expected fire spread is. Obviously, you know, we're encountering conditions that are way outside of the historical realm, but I think the like 90% conditions that are reflected in here often can capture that. And even if the fire weather is a lot more extreme than that, like it will be in some cases, it does kind of just help you understand like where does the fire want to go, and it's just really nice to have that tool available. It's being used in a lot of firefighting situations and by different agencies. I can't really go into detail about that, but it's starting to get adapted for just, you know, more broad use for a lot of different purposes. But the intent of it is that it's an open source, freely available product that anyone can use. And the goal was to make it really easy to use, so that it would be really accessible. So that's the Pyrocast portion of Pyrogens, and we're also doing a really big effort on long-term forecasts as well, and that'll be available. This project is about halfway through. It's a 5-year project, so the products are starting to come out, and we'll all be out within the next year or two. So that's yeah, I guess we have about 15 minutes left, and I guess this is kind of where I wanted to open up the discussion and just kind of start asking people if there's any questions. I'm happy to answer them. And then also questions for you guys. I'm curious, like, what tools do you use now for land management planning, for fire response, fire planning? And then I'm curious, can you see yourself submitting like, you know, information about where you're doing forest treatments? Does that feel good to you? Does that feel bad to you? Obviously, this data is not used for any commercial purposes. It's for Pyrogens. It's all open source. It's, you know, funded by tax dollars, and it's really just meant to improve our fire prediction models to help everyone else get a good sense of, you know, what fire would look like on the landscape. And then, are there any tools that you've been wishing you had that we could help build? Because part of what SIG does is build cool tools to help people access information that they need. So yeah, I'm happy to open it up to discussion.
Carrie, thank you so much. Your work is incredibly interesting, and I feel like I'm definitely a novice in modeling. But I have a couple of questions, but it looks like you answered the insurance question, which was addressed in the chat. And then it looks like Nina had a question: how does forest management and broadcast burning impact the model? And Nina, maybe if I know sometimes you have trouble with internet, but if you want, you can explain a little bit more. I think what she's trying to say is whether you've seen how these results in areas that were previously treated, how they've impacted fire severity.
Yeah, so there's trade-offs in models always. And the trade-off for doing this CONUS wide for First Street or for the Fire Factor project is that because we're doing it nationwide, we really want it to be consistent nationwide. So the set of tools that we're using is kind of blunt for that project, where when there's a low severity treatment like prescribed fire, you won't really get a big change in the fuels, and you kind of expect that because for canopy fuels, you're not expecting the canopy fuels to change very much, or if at all, for prescribed fire. And then the surface fuel model that we're using for that is more of like a qualitative descriptive model than it is a model of like actual fuel loading. So occasionally you'll get a shift to a different fuel model from that, but it really doesn't affect fire behavior that much. But for something like the Pyrogents project, that's, it's California wide, but we can kind of dig in and do things at smaller scales. And so something that I'm working on now is trying to be able to collect a lot of like really high resolution information from like particular fire safe or firewise communities or areas where we know that there's been a lot of fuel reduction that we wouldn't capture, and to try to get that into a GIS system for private lands. We're piloting this in Lassen County and Modoc, and that's just because we have a lot of funding for those counties in particular. But I really am advocating to extending it into Nevada County as well. So I'm hoping to get that up and running, but that kind of just depends on people's willingness to share that information. And I really recognize that there's a lot of sensitivity around that, and that, there may be hesitation because you might feel like you don't know where the data is going to end up or something like that. So part of what we're trying to figure out with working at like higher resolutions for smaller areas and how we can really do better updates to the surface fuel models based on those types of low severity, but still really important forest restoration treatments, is just thinking about like how we get community participation to do that. So yeah, the answer to that is that it kind of differs depending on the scale.
And if anybody else has questions, just raise your hand or put them in the chat. But in the meantime, I have a question. Oh, go ahead, Theo.
Hey, thanks. That was a great talk. Very interesting. Something I don't know much about at all. Another thing I don't much about is everything. But I think I heard you say that the fuel treatments on the surface fuels doesn't affect the fire behavior much. I'm not sure if I heard that right or not. And if so, would you explain a little more?
Yeah. So these fire models, the way that they work is they use for canopy fuels, they use 4 different canopy fuel layers. They use canopy cover, canopy height, and then canopy base height. So the distance from the canopy to the ground. And that's really important for like, does the fire transition from a surface fire to a canopy fire, and then canopy bulk density, which is basically like how much material is in the canopy. So those are really important for like modeling fire movement through the canopy when it becomes a canopy fire. But for the surface fuel models, the way that these fire models work is that they don't have, they're spatially explicit. So it's per pixel, it's a 30-meter pixel, so it's like 90 feet by 90 feet. And then each pixel for the surface fuel is explained by one of 40 classes. It's like just a way that a methodology that was developed by the Forest Service that's been widely adapted. And the classes are based on the vegetation type. So they're grass classes, grass, shrub, timber understory, timber litter, and then like slash pile. So, and then within those classes, there will be usually like 4 to 6 classes. So there's like classes for East Coast, like humid forests, like Florida, like, like almost tropical, and Western forests, and chaparral. And so there's 40 classes. So there's a lot of nuance in it, but the classes are referring to a relationship between like how fire is basically flame length and the fire movement. So is it slow, moderate, or fast when it moves across the surface? So if you think of the difference between like a grass fire that's moving really fast but staying low to the ground versus timber understory where it might be smoldering and moving more slowly but having higher flame lengths because there's fuel. So it's qualitative. It's quantitative in the sense that each one is based on different curves of those relationships. between like the fire behavior metrics, but it's qualitative in the sense that the classes are more descriptive of like the types of fuels and how those fuels burn than they are of like exactly how much fuel load is in there. So when you do a prescribed fire, you're reducing the fuel loads, but you're not necessarily really changing the fuel class. If you have a high severity wildfire, you might be changing the class because you'd be transitioning it, maybe from a timber understory to a grass or grass shrub, in the recovery after fire. But for something that's more low severity, you're not really going to change that relationship between like how a surface fire might move, which we know is, not totally accurate, but just for like these models are so like just we run them on these like crazy computer clusters. They're just really intense models, so you can't fit like all that nuance into them necessarily. But we are working on other projects where we're modeling fuel loads in particular, but just for this type of fire model, that's just not the information that they require. Sorry, that was maybe too lengthy, but hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. So it's not that it's not helpful in any way. It's just that the way the model's set up and the scale you're doing at, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. John, I see your hand up, but I'm actually going to address Warren's question in the chat because it popped up first. So Carrie, Warren asked, we're currently seeing very significant weather changes due to climate change. This will result in significant fuel change over the short term, even in the short term. Expectations are that our local vegetation mix will look more and more like Southern California. Will this be problematic or will this type of change be problematic for the modeling?
Yeah, so no, it's not problematic. It's actually incorporated into the modeling. So I'll just scroll back up to this side. Okay. I think she's telling me it's time for dinner. So the I just pulled up the model again to show you, or sorry, the flow chart of the model to show you how we're incorporating those that climate change and future weather into our predictions for future hazards. So it actually gets incorporated in two different ways. It gets incorporated in the future weather itself, which is inputs into the fire models. So we have a team that is working on how do we model out, fine scale, like hourly weather for 2051. So that includes relative humidity, precipitation, and temperature. And so these are all, experts in that type of climate modeling. So we're using future climate in the fire models, and we're also incorporating future climate in the vegetation projections. So this ecosystem process model, it's a model called Lucas, and we basically are taking our current vegetation and then using this ecosystem process model under different climate change scenarios. So the IPCC scenarios, we're doing, I think, 8.5 and 4. And then modeling how carbon changes under those different climate scenarios, because we know, just like you said, that that the climate is going to really impact vegetation and fuels, and then crosswalking the carbon pools back to these fuel pools. So that's how we incorporate that climate change aspect into the future conditions.
Thanks, Carrie. John, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation and your time. My question, so in these severe areas of wildfires, there's a transition from, say, a timber fuel model to what's essentially brush, but with the fuel loading of a timber model. So my question is, how well do these, like even at the 30-meter resolution, how well does if you were to run a simulation, say 15 years down the road in a pre-burned area, how well does it capture that, or does it need to be more fine scale with like data from fuels on the ground?
Yeah, so that is kind of what I was referring to in this slide. So for that type of work, we are using measured fuel changes over time. So in both post-fire and unburned areas, we've been measuring how quickly snags fall over time, and then measuring how those, like how the biomass from like the dead trees transitions from the standing dead pool into the surface fuel pool. So that's a case where we're looking at it more from like a fuel loading perspective than from like a surface fuel model perspective. Like I was referring to before with the 40, the Scott Bergen surface fuel classes.
Mhm.
So this is more of like a case, yeah, like you're saying, where you're following how the fuels are transitioning between these different pools over time, and then fitting that those relationships into what we're using for this is FES, which is a Forest Service tool that they use to model like forest stand characteristics over time, and they do that as an annual time step. And so we're substituting basically our measured data into their models, and then using that to predict how fuels are changing over time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Brendan, go ahead.
Hey, mine is more just some feedback that you'd asked for, less a question.
Awesome. Thanks.
I think the modeling is super cool, and it is going to be an incredibly powerful tool. I think you guys might be underestimating how much insurance companies might dig into that, though. And my first thought is a way to keep them from turning this into kind of a hostile resource is to really focus on that sort of ground level reporting that you had mentioned. So I run a fuels crew here in Nevada County, and we would be super happy to report all of the data from all of our jobs, because I think that would help our clients sort of have some defense against the insurance companies. And I think having that accountability from both sides in the open source data would kind of level the playing field for everybody there. I think it would keep things fair.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I have talked to a friend who owns a tree work business as well here, and I feel like there's a balance because it's hard to ask people to do extra work for you, but we're trying to think of how we might be able to incentivize people contributing that information, and basically maybe saying like, if you contribute information, you can use all the data or something like that. And so I think we definitely need to like just have some more conversations about it. But yeah, if people who are doing the work are willing to share that data, with the permission of the landowners, and the landowners, have a reason, like, or an incentive to share that. I think basically we need to incentivize it for people and make it really like easy to do. But that's awesome. Thanks. That's really great feedback, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, I hope that, the thing about the information being open to the public is it's true, anyone can use it. But what's different about this, the thing is that the insurance companies are already using this information. They're not using, my specific modeling, but they're using their own modeling, and theirs is much less transparent. And so at least with this, I think, it's almost preferable if an insurance company is using this, because at least why the decisions are being made that are being made. And you are able to, based on, like, let's say you change your roof type, you can submit that to the website and it will change it and update your score. If there's defensible space metrics in it, so if you improve your defensible space, you can submit that to the website and it will update your score. So it's really responsive to that kind of thing, which is really important, I think, especially for fire. So yeah, I understand why, it might be kind of scary to see that, but I really I wouldn't work on it if I thought it was for evil. I really feel strongly that just having this information can be really empowering for people. So yeah, it would be great. I'd love to follow up. I realized I never got to the very last slide, which had an email for people jump off, because I know at the end, just wanted to put that up there in case people want to email me. And yeah, I'd love to just continue this conversation with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, definitely, Carrie. I know we're running a couple minutes over, but I also have a question. So
just, yeah, if there's more questions, I'm not in a hurry, so feel free.
Thank you so much. I think everything you're bringing up is really important. And I do agree that there's this disconnect, right, between modeling and then things that are going on the ground. And I'm definitely one of the people that's more on the ground. And so the modeling stuff goes a little bit over my head. But if you have recommendations for more finer scale models that can reflect the changes that we're making at a more community scale, do you have any recommendations for things that that we can look at that do have that level of data?
No.
No, okay.
That just doesn't exist yet, unfortunately, but that's what I'm really excited to work on next. And I've had a lot of conversations with people in this area, especially in the more rural parts where people are doing a lot of work. But I do think that partnering with the RCDs is probably the best first step. And we have, we have all of the data from the RCs of that they've made public of treatments or treatments on public lands. But I think it would be probably the easiest first step would be to figure out, just based on some of the grants that people get to do this work, especially, if it's publicly funded grants, then that data should be publicly available. So I think we just need to start working on how to get that data. When we're doing it CONUS-wide, a big aspect of it is that all of it has to be pretty automated. But when you're doing it at a finer scale, there might be some room for it to be slightly less automated. But the more automated it is, the easier it is to update it in if you want it to be, if you want to get annual maps. So yeah, that you it's just one of those things where you have to figure out how to strike the balance. But yeah, at the moment, there isn't really anything that would be available that would reflect that.
And then just a follow-up question, and maybe this is probably the same response, but oh, well, so Brendan put a comment. He says he could speak confidently for his clients. They'd be willing to report his data. And sorry, Brendan, maybe you can just explain your comment.
Yeah. Basically, I don't think that you guys need to do any extra legwork as far as incentives go. Our clients would be hounding us to make sure that we got our data reported. They already paid for the fuels work. So it would be an extra cherry on top for them to have that shown in the models. So literally just give us the email address that you want the data sent to, and it'll just start flowing in.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and then Theo actually says if there's any microscale wind forecasting or tools that people already use to good effect, or do you just always have to know local conditions? And that was something that was one of my follow-up questions, because I think what RCDs and some agencies are struggling with is there are some really large landowners that can kind of determine where the most effective prioritization zone on their property is, but there's also a lot of small groups of landowners that if they're doing their own defensible space and working on their own property, but they're incredibly frustrated that their neighbor is not doing the same level of work, are there ways to identify where priorities, or tools to identify where priorities are taken? I know the RCD works with certain members of CAL FIRE that have helped determine strategic locations, but it might be valuable for communities themselves to know where those areas are, and they can work together to get the work done.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, the fire behavior modeling really shows you that. I don't know, it's meant to be thought at a landscape scale. So looking at it pixel by pixel, like this is my property, this is your property, like that might not be as, it's not really what it's intended for. But I do think that there's a lot of there's a lot of prioritization tools out there that might be better suited for that than what these are in particular. But I think that, yeah, that's a really good question. And I know that that's like a major sticking point, but yeah, I'm not sure that this tool necessarily answers it, but it could just kind of help you for like slightly larger landscapes to get a sense of where the burn probability is predicted to be higher or lower across like certain areas. And maybe that would be a kind of entry point to that.
Awesome, thank you, Carrie. Kristen, I'll let you ask our last question of the evening.
Oh, good for me. Thank you. And first, thank you, Carrie. I'm in a Firewise community in Nevada County, you bet. And kind of a follow on to what was just being talked about in terms of neighbor to neighbor. I think one of our biggest concerns here is evacuation routes.
Mhm.
And we have quite a large Firewise community. It's about 15,000 acres, over 700 parcels. Most are anywhere from 5 acres to 160 acre parcels. And I think, with our one way in, one way out 9-mile road, we're really concerned about choke points and potential for, the fact that most of those landowners who are absentee landowners haven't really done any work on their land, and it will choke our evacuation route. And so from a modeling perspective, right now it's kind of overwhelming to say, where do we start?
Yeah.
Because it's bad, but but with topography and everything else involved, if we could, identify 1, 2, or 3 areas and then rally around those, I think we could really make a difference as a community. But we're so over our heads in our ability to do that. So would this tool do something like that?
I think it could. So I can't really like give specific, data and maps until April, but I'm more than happy to kind of walk you through what the data looks like when it comes out. So if you want to, let me go back to that slide with my email. If you want to email me, I can follow up with you, and maybe we can just do a Zoom and I can look at the data with you and we can see what comes out.
Great, thank you. I will do so.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Awesome. Carrie, thank you. Your work is super cool. And I think everything's moving in the right direction. And all of these different tools really help us kind of find solutions to the wildfire problem. But with that, thank you everybody for such a lively discussion. And also thank you to those who were able to stay on a little bit longer. I hope you guys join us next month. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Guys.